Bobbio Show.
Welcome to the Bobbio Show. My name is Bobo Potsner, and I have a great show lined up for you today. The weather is so gorgeous today in Richfield, Connecticut. I decided to do this show live from my backyard, and we're going to talk about a very somber topic, but I thought with the weather the way it is today, it's gorgeous. No rain, like we had a couple weeks ago where it was 7.5 or 8 inches of rain in a couple of hours. And we're going to talk about a two-part series I have put together, involving dealing with death and grief. The first show today is with Dr. Deb Gilman, who is a psychologist out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who I first met at a seminar here in Connecticut. It's going to be talking about how we deal with grief and help young children deal with grief. The second show in a few weeks will be with Deborah as well as Michelle Phillips, the author of Happiness is a Habit, and we're going to talk about death and dying and afterlife, whatever comes up in the topics, to deal with this issue that faces all of us at some point in time. So I'm going to introduce to you again, Deborah Gilman will tell us a little bit about who she is and what she does. And shalom, Deborah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me again, Bob. I really love being on your show. And I think this topic is certainly one that is sometimes difficult for us to discuss, but is so important because it really is just about life and life processes that we all experience. So I am a licensed psychologist and I am a parenting and attachment expert. I work with families from that go through all different types of family transitions and things that are happening with families in general. So I'm out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And again, I'm really happy to be here, really thrilled to be talking with you, Bobby, about this important topic.
Deb, we have an organization in our area, in Danbury, Connecticut area, called Ann's Place. I've done several shows with Ann's Place, and they deal with people who have cancer, but they don't treat them for the medical issues. They deal with their families and children along these lines of issues about helping families cope with difficult times. So I think it's very important for the show that you've put together for us today. Deb, why don't you start off by talking a little bit about developmental issues of children, because I'm sure that impacts how you deal with a child depending upon their age and cognitive development in terms of dealing with this issue of grief.
Yeah, I mean, when a child experiences illness that could be, chronic or that could lead to death or the loss of a loved one, it really is a challenging time. It's an emotional time. And depending on the age of the children, they experience and cope with death in very different ways. So it's important to consider the age of the child and their developmental stage when you're trying to discuss what is going on in their family with them. So I do have maybe slide number 1 that we could just that just explains that in general, it's really important to think about how children process loss. And in early childhood, around, ages 2 to 5, there really is a limited understanding of death. Kids don't often understand finality. So death is seen as maybe temporary or something that's reversible, like maybe grandma could come back. And so it's something that we really have to help them understand that grandma isn't coming back, and we may have to repeat it a couple times for the children to understand that it's not reversible, which certainly could be really hard on parents if we're trying to process this thing and we're understanding that we're maybe being grieving again or being re-traumatized by having to talk to our kids again. So for early childhood, focus on concrete experiences. Make
Deborah,
sure that they really...
Why don't we show your slide? There, slide number 1.
Yeah, that's slide number 2. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't actually see the slide. Here's slide number 1. Here's number 2.
Yeah,
Okay.
number 1 is just the yeah. So number 2 says that, there is this limited understanding of death, and that we wanna make sure that we're focusing on their concrete experience. And you might see children not being able to express themselves because, again, 2 to 5, limited language, limited ability for abstract reasoning and thought. So you might see things like behavior changes, maybe bedwetting, thumb sucking. Maybe they're having some separation anxiety, or they're clinging a little bit more to you. Maybe even changes in appetite and sleep. So, those are things that might signal that the children are trying to process grief and maybe having a little bit of difficulty with it. So, again, moms and dads, caregivers are really important for providing comfort and security at this age. So, they rely heavily on your presence and your nurturance and your reassurance to help them understand what's going on in the family.
Deb, when you have a child
Bobby said.
2 to 5 years of age, I guess one issue that comes up is, let's suppose one of the parents has an illness that's a very serious illness. At what point in time, and how do you go about thinking at what point in time do you start telling the child something's going on? Um, uh, Talk to me a little bit about that for a child, let's say the 2 to 5 age bracket. When do you open up the topic that mommy or daddy is not well and mommy and daddy may someday not be here with you?
Yeah, that is again like another really difficult thing. And there is this idea of preparing yourself for grief because it is a process. And if you know that mom or dad or grandma might not get better, it's really important to start them understanding what's happening. So providing them an environment where they can understand what the process might be for their family member, and what changes they might see, particularly if it's something that has changes that are physical, that they might see hair falling out, or they might see things from operations. And so using terms and explanations that are easy for the child to understand, making sure that you're answering questions honestly and openly, and letting them know that their feelings are normal and acceptable, and then making sure that there's those touch points with the person in the family that is sick, because you want to make sure that there is some ability for them to grieve together and come to this healing moment together as the illness continues to help them to, I guess, take over everyone's life, right? And so understanding the emotions behind it are really important for
Deb,
the
Deb,
kids and
psycho,
for the parent.
Deb, psychologically, um, obviously there's at least two different ways of approaching it. Some parents, I'm sure, uh, don't tell until the last possible opportunity because maybe the parent, him or herself, hasn't yet accepted that the end may be coming. But can you talk about the psychological differences from your observations and experience by telling a child, let's say 6 or 8 months ahead of time when it's likely death is going to happen, versus waiting until almost the last moment? Can you talk a little bit about that
I
psychologically?
Yeah, I mean, it really is important to go through like a process of grief. There are stages of grief that everybody in the family is going to be experiencing. And it depends on the child's understanding and the child's age, really. I mean, talking about a parent's or family member's impending death is really complicated. Younger children definitely need more support and reassurance. They may not be able to understand the finality early. So you might want to wait until it's closer to the end. Older children who can handle more complex information will be able to go through a stage of grief, or those stages of grief, maybe along with the person who's dying, along with the other family members. If it is a really close relationship, like a parent, and the child has a close bond with the parent, it is more beneficial oftentimes to let them know about the parent's illness earlier, because it allows them to, again, create some moments where they can process the grief together, have really important memories and opportunities to create some memories that the child can take with them for a long, after the person is gone. You might also want to consider the person who's ill's wishes. So if they're anxious to tell the child, or maybe they don't want to tell the child, or to your point, Bobby, they might be struggling with the diagnosis or the finality of their own lives, it might be harder for them to want the children to know in advance. So try to respect their wishes as well is really important. And then I also think you think about your own child and their emotional maturity and their ability to handle information. If they're already going through a difficult time or they have some other things that are happening, you might want to wait until they're stable to be able to have that conversation.
Before we go to the next age bracket, I was just thinking as you're talking about this discussion, and that is the importance of having the parent who is ill and the parent who's not ill, who's going to be the surviving parent, for example, or grandparent, about getting him or herself sort of able to deal with what's going on. And I would suspect if the parents can cope better, okay, no one's going to take it easily, of course, but if the parents are in a position where they may be needing some help psychologically and emotionally, support, whatever, the importance of having the parents involved sort of get together the best they can before or while they're talking to the child or children. Thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that when you're going through it and how you're coping can also either strengthen the coping for the child, or it could weaken it, right? So if the parent is really having a hard time, or both parents are having a hard time, it may not be best to tell the children until the parental unit is stable, or until the person who's going through the medical challenge is stable and has their own coping skills available, because it would be very hard to talk through these things and provide a space where children can process their own emotions if the parents' emotions are so big that there's really not a lot of room for the child, or the child feels overwhelmed by what the parent is expressing.
Let's go to the next age bracket you want to deal with, Deborah.
Sure. The next age bracket is this middle childhood age. So these are the kids that have started school and they're not yet in middle school, but they're understanding a lot more about the world, and they understand time a lot more. So we want to make sure that we are helping them grasp the permanence of death. They might not still have the abstract concepts at the younger part of this age group, but they do understand what it means to die and sort of have no more lives. Like, they oftentimes think about video games though, so they might say, okay, you can come back, or there could be like not a pure understanding of death. A lot of the time, the children in this age group you'll see some difficulty in handling emotions. You might have some anger, some guilt, some withdrawal. You might see some little challenges in persisting with things that are difficult. Things that might not usually upset them might upset them. You also want to watch for sleeping and eating changes as well. But you're going to see more emotions, and they do have the ability to cope. So giving them some strategies can be really helpful. They might have some difficulties in school. You might see things come out in not wanting to play t-ball, not wanting to go to practices or birthday parties. That's sort of things that we see when people are dealing with difficult feelings. And so we might say that would signal a little bit of difficulty for them socially. So we want to make sure that we continue to help them have positive experiences and not withdraw from their community or things that make them feel good.
And I would suspect that some of the biggest issues to deal with is not just the shall we say, death period of time, but maybe the post, once the parent has passed away. It's not over. Let's wipe our hands. We're done. That may be some of the more difficult time, especially for the middle school child age, because I was on the Board of Education for many years in Richfield and another town, Shelton, Connecticut. And sometimes you find even kids who have as stable home life as you can in the 6th, 7th grade, those are very tough years. So what about getting ready to addressing the post-event situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, Bobby, particularly if the person who has died is somebody who was involved in some of these things. Like, dad was the soccer coach, and now I have to go to soccer, but dad's not there anymore. So the grief can show up in so many different ways. Shows up again maybe at holidays or birthdays where these people were at once present and are no longer there, and so kids might withdraw, or they might feel like they want to isolate themselves or not continue to do the things that they were part of before, because those memories are so big for them. I remember when my grandfather died, I was in 5th grade and I was a swimmer, and it was really hard for me to go to like my next couple meets and look up in the stands and not see my grandfather being there. And I can remember he was such a big cheerleader for me, so that missing piece sat with me, and I can still remember it now, right? And I'm in my 40s, and I can remember how significant that was for me. So you have to remember that there, in unexpected ways or things that you don't even realize, the grief might be continuing even after the funeral is over, and it's in most people's thoughts that it's been time to process this. It continues. It's a never ending process of the grief cycle.
An important part of what we're doing with also is planning. A lot of people your age, for example, may not have wills, may not have plans about what's going to happen if something happens. And if planning isn't there, if there's not life insurance around, if there's not economic stability, and let's say the surviving parent just can't, let's suppose the parent that passed away was the primary breadwinner, and the economics are not there. Talk about the fact that you have a child who not only has lost mommy or daddy or grandma or grandpa, but now maybe they have to move out of the town, out of the house where they were living. And so you have not only the jolt of not having that parent around anymore, and then the jolt of having mommy or daddy now having to now maybe work 2 jobs or whatever to try to make ends meet. Now there's the issue about I can't stay in my bedroom anymore. How about talking about some of those things to deal with? Sort of the,
Yeah, I mean, those are really huge things, particularly if, things happen sort of suddenly and tragically, and maybe both parents are lost in a death. So making sure that you have your legal documents. Of course, you're the lawyer, I'm just the psychologist, but having your will, living trust, and any other legal documents up to date, making sure that you have a trusted guardian for your children. And creating some sort of plan is definitely important, and discussing those things with your family. I don't think a lot of us really discuss these things. And so suddenly, Aunt Sally is the guardian, but nobody told Aunt Sally that she was going to be the guardian. And now that's a surprise for Aunt Sally. It's a surprise for the kids. And it can be really challenging to navigate that. Now, if you tell people in advance what your wishes are and what your hopes are, then everybody is able to provide that stable grounding and that foundation for the children when everything is changing. Particularly if you know that you're going to be dying, or that there's going to be a change in your family, it is important to have those conversations with the kids too, so that they understand what might change when the family change happens to them. But
well,
definitely discussing preferences with your family is huge.
I'm smiling because it's not, oh, I'm not alone in this one. When my kids were young, let's say when they were 6 and 9, for example, we didn't have a will for many years. Why? Because we couldn't agree upon whose family was going to get the children. And I know many people who have that experience about they don't do that, and it's really important to try to find a way, because the last thing you want is to have some court decide, is it going to go to my brother or sister, your brother or sister, whoever it's going to be. And if you don't have things planned out in advance, it makes the difficult problem even more so, to have some internal strife. And you want to make sure that you may not love the other side of your family, but you got to make sure that they have equal access to. You don't want to cut out grandma, paternal grandma, but not maternal grandma. There's a lot of things to talk about. So you're right about that part. And the other thing is, we've been talking about death. Divorce can also be even, maybe perhaps even more grief for a child at these various ages, because all of a sudden mommy or daddy may not be in the same house, or there's going to be fights about That's where I get involved, right? And you get involved. You're an amateur lawyer sometimes. I'm an amateur psychologist sometimes to deal with some of these issues that project onto the children. You want to talk a little about the divorce situation as being maybe even a bigger grief concept or as big a grief concept for young kids.
I mean, they're very similar, and there is a grief process even in divorce. You know that everybody's life is changing. The family, as you know it, does not exist anymore. The old ways of doing things aren't the new ways of doing things, and sometimes there's a lot of unknowing, uncertainty, upset, confusion around all of that. And so, we look at things like how is the physical space changing for children and how are they adapting to it, how are they coping with it, so just their own emotional space, the psychological space, which is kind of different than emotions are how are they feeling about it, the psychological space is what are they actually coping with this change. So in death and divorce you might be coping with a lot of adult matters, a lot of adult things that are big and scary, and kids don't have a lot of choices in any of these things. And so, is their psychological space of just being a kid and developing and thriving being taken over by things that they can't control or more adult matter type of things? And we always want to look for community involvement. How are they staying connected to their community? How are they staying connected to their school and their peers and the things that they should be, as well as their family? Are they staying connected to their families, whether they lost people because of divorce or they lost people because of a death? And as you think about teenagers, which is the slide that's up now, is like teenagers understand the finality of death. They even understand the finality of divorce, right? They probably have had friends who've been divorced. They've watched TV shows or read books about people who are divorced. So they get it that these things are permanent. And because of that, they could experience a lot of emotions, sadness, anger, sometimes guilt. Like, if I only would have been better, if I only would have gotten mom or dad to stop smoking, right? Like, if I could have had some control in this. So you might see them withdraw as well, or you might see them acting a little bit more grown than they are and starting to make decisions and wanting to be super independent because they don't feel like they have a lot of control. So they'll be looking to find control in any way that they can get it. So they might resist help, but it's so important that, as the adults and the caregivers with our children, we look for those in routes to give them support, even when they're pushing for their independence. And it's a nice balance between empowering the child to cope, but also allowing them to still be children and recognize that they still have children things and developmental things, tasks that they have to accomplish, and we as the adults have to make sure we're supporting them and guiding them to that next level so they can fly and be independent. When our grief takes over, it gets in the way of that, and that invades their psychological space, and it either pushes them too soon to maturity or it holds them back from actually being able to be independent and thrive. So we really have to be careful as adults what we're doing to help children cope with these things.
And the other thing, if you're doing it in the divorce scenario, it's important for parents to act like adults, right? I mean, I've seen too many cases where parents are not acting like adults and they're more worried about the extra 5 minutes that one parent gets. This is not every case, but some of the more difficult cases, they're more worried about, am I going to get exactly 50% of the time, or am I getting 5 minutes less per day? And it's sad when you see kids, especially when you see kids, let's say early teenage years, where they're acting like the parents should be acting, and that puts an additional strain on the children psychologically, which I think would lead us as a good segue, perhaps, to the children who are, let's say, 12 to 18. I think there's a slide for that one, Deb.
Yeah, and I think that that was some of the stuff that I was just talking about. And, especially for teenagers who are trying to understand relationships and understand life. And there's already all these big existential questions that I think a lot of times teenagers might question the meaning of life, the meaning of relationships. And whether it's a divorce or losing someone close to us, it really can create some big thoughts and big feelings. And making sure that the parents are available to create space for this open dialogue. And, a lot of things that we can do to encourage children coping and teens coping is, thinking about those good memories. So write down the happy memories you have with whomever died, or maybe the other parent who you don't get to see very much after the divorce, and make sure we're focusing on the positive things. Fold them up, put them in a jar. You can read them later, or at times where the kids really need to cope with or need that extra reassurance of what that person means to them, whether it's a divorce and they're still alive, or whether it was the death for someone. The next activity is thinking about, like, happy memories you have. Maybe you want to write down, like, what are our happy memories as a family? What are the happy memories we had together? Why is that memory special to you? Parents can listen to that and really explore thoughts and feelings and create that safe space for dialogue. A lot of times drawings, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words, and it really is for a lot of people to see what's on their child's mind. It's easier for children to draw than it is to talk about things, and this can open up a wealth of information for you to understand what's going on with your kids.
Deb, we only have 2 minutes left in this first part of our show, and I want to ask you about one last topic, which maybe you can address, and that is sometimes parents might misconstrue a child not talking very much or being quiet and not showing outward manifestations of difficulties. And just a couple of thoughts and suggestions you have in the last minute or two that we have to give parents some tips as to what they should look for. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier in the show, but just what they can look for, especially the older kids, as to making sure that what may be looking okay beneath the surface, not so good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the withdrawal, it's isolation. Teenagers are sometimes moody, but it's like you'll see like a lot more moodiness, right? Not and behavior patterns that change. Whenever you see your child maybe not eating, not sleeping well, not doing homework, changing peer groups, those are all things that are concerning. If a teenager withdraws and isolates themselves, that's hard. I mean, I think you can say something very simple like, I know this is really tough. I'm here for you. Even if you don't want to talk, I want you to know whatever you're feeling right now is okay. It's normal. We can do things together if you want, or just hanging out in silence, taking a car ride can sometimes be helpful. Of course, teens want parents to respect their need for independence and privacy, but involving them in decision making, offering choices, and making sure you're encouraging them with peers, or even think about the community if there's some support groups, some community groups for grief and loss and divorce.
Deb, we have to run. Just one quick thought I have is I recently started watching a series on Netflix called Everwood. It's about a family who lost the mother and how the family deals with it over. It's a very good show with Treat Williams. Deborah Gilman, you are wonderful. Thank you for being on the show. We'll see you again soon. And take care of Pennsylvania for us. You know what I'm talking about. Be well.
I do.
This has been
Thank you.
Bob Potsner on The Bobby O Show. Be well, everybody.